My name is Hassan Hassan. I'm the editor-in-chief of New Lines magazine. The rise of rural music coming from the countryside, the suburbs, and the slums of the Middle East over the past 2 decades is a fascinating story of a subculture reclaiming its prominence after being stifled and policed by cultural gatekeepers in urban centers for decades. Cultural gatekeepers try to curate content on radio and television as part of nation-building projects over the past century, and they excluded rural music because they saw the rural music as vulgar and low style. It's a low artistic form. But what happened over the past 2 decades is that technology circumvented that monopoly. Rural music has been able to rise and dominate in much of the Middle East and even beyond because of first the proliferation of satellite channels in the early 2000s, then the rise of YouTube and other social media platforms after this. Rural music tends to be more everyday language, focuses on anything from how people live in rural areas to people complaining about power cuts like in Egypt, or someone complaining about corruption in Iraq. That language of everyday life, on one hand, was seen by cultural elites as vulgar, whereas it resonated with people in the streets and people, ordinary people who wanted to listen to songs about love and other daily happenings. Also, rural music was made for the internet age. It's raw, it's fast tempo, it has also comical nature to it, almost like stand-up comedy, but in song form. Take Shaiban Abdulrahim. He became famous for 2 main songs. One was simply about quitting smoking. He says, "I will give up smoking and become a new person. Starting from January, I will be lifting weights. I will crack melon seeds and drink light tea. I will go down to the store and buy a new shirt." Most of his songs are like this. Someone from the cities or outside would probably laugh at the style. It's very silly. Even the melody is not very polished. That's why they are, kind of shunned by cultural elites. And that's actually a big factor of why, before technology, the persistence of these songs happened because people organically spread them at weddings and nightclubs. Many of these rural singers actually started as wedding singers, because a lot of people who know Omar Suleiman today, they know him from songs that have hundreds of millions of views on YouTube. They don't know the person that I saw when I was a teenager, living in a very humble, remote village in eastern Syria, and he performed for as little as $70 or even less at the time. So singers like Omar Suleiman made their money at the time, not just from the fee they got, but also from tipping. Someone would whisper into the ears of the wedding singer with names they want to give shout out to, and that would usually be accompanied with money given to the singer or to one of his companions. Also, that includes sometimes even burning money as a sign of generosity to the singer as well. That would obviously be matched with the equal amount of money given directly to the wedding singer. Tipping was part of also being featured in some of these songs. Some people actually even hope that because these songs are recorded, they would hope that these will live on in cassette. Admittedly, I participated in this cultural phenomenon at the time. I was heading to Damascus to start my university studies, and I wanted to plug that. At the time, it felt like I engaged in a cultural phenomena, but it also tells a bigger story of how these songs are sustained by the ordinary people in the towns and villages and cities. And in fact, that's why I think rural music is a fascinating phenomenon. It's actually fodder for studies by anthropologists, by journalists and others who look into these trends and try to understand what's going on in the region right now. Usually you don't actually learn much from television shows or mainstream music. as much as you learn from folk music from the street, where people are actually talking about daily life in the Middle East. The rise of these songs has been met with the backlash from cultural gatekeepers in the region. That backlash in its intensity matched the ferocious rise of country music in the region. There are attempts still to kind of suppress this, regulate how these songs are featured in the public space. For example, in places like Egypt, there are even legal actions to stop these singers from performing in public. These singers also include female singers who also push the boundaries about what they can and cannot talk about. They address certain grievances in their society or in the region. You also have certain singers who talk about old habits and norms, social norms, arranged marriage or forced marriage, and they talk about interfamily marriage between relatives and cousins. And they have songs singing about how this should not be accepted. So these songs are dismissed by elites as vulgar, but if you zoom in and you immerse yourself in that culture, you will find the themes actually everyday themes in the region, and you learn so much from them, more than mainstream singers who usually sing about love. Female singers in particular put themselves at great risk because they tackle certain themes that tend to be critical of social norms. They're talking about their maybe love story, how society reacted to them. They talk about certain themes that are seen as pushing the boundaries within a very conservative society. Folk music, rural music has always been part of either against nation building or in favor of nation building. That the idea of what a certain country produces reflects how that country is perceived outside. This idea of who claims ownership of certain traditional forms has enabled the rise of subnational identities. And they say this is actually our heritage. That has become a kind of an identity, cultural identity. And through songs, through social media, you started to see people asserting these things rather than curating a certain form as a Syrian form, and there's the Iraqi form and Jordanian form. You have these old areas carving out a new space for themselves that often goes beyond national borders. They're also going beyond the region, where people in the diaspora, people like Syrian refugees and others, promoting and even inviting their favorite singers to go and perform in these areas. So now we have singers who broke free, not from their towns and villages and even countries, from the wider region and the whole world. And I think that trend will continue. Some of these singers in the street, they would sing without even musical instruments, and they have millions and millions of viewers watching them, subscribing to their channels, and they're hearing their stories. You see, for example, there are famous clips of radio hosts in Germany, and they have people in the streets of like European streets and elsewhere also singing these songs. That affirms also this is actually going global. This person comes from our village, but he's now famous. I'm going to listen to more. I'm going to carry that more proudly than before.